The humiliation was a physical thing. It felt like a wave of heat washing over my skin, my ears ringing. The room was dead silent. Utterly, completely silent. You could have heard a pin drop on the thick carpet. I risked a glance around the room, and the faces of our guests were a sickening, surreal collage of shock, pity, and outright horror. But she wasn't done. Oh no, she had a grand finale. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, she finished, raising her glass high, a triumphant, almost manic look on her face. It's just so amazing how things work out. That someone with so much baggage can find someone so stable and good like Mark. It gives hope to all of us, really. So, let's raise a glass to Sarah and Mark. May your marriage be as full of surprises as Sarah's past. She took a long, deliberate sip from her glass, her eyes still on me, and then she sat down, smoothing her dress as if she had just delivered the most beautiful, heartfelt tribute in history. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity, a thick, unbearable blanket of awkwardness and shock. No one clapped. No one moved. It was like she had deployed a neutron bomb that had vaporized all the air and joy and celebration from the room, leaving only the stunned bodies behind. I just stared at the intricate floral pattern on my plate, my vision blurring with hot tears that I refused to let fall. I would not give her the satisfaction. My wedding, the happiest day of my life, had been hijacked and systematically turned into a public shaming, a spectacle of my deepest pain. The person I had chosen to stand beside me as a symbol of our love and loyalty had instead chosen to stand over me, grinding my heart into the dust. The best man, Tom, God bless him, eventually jumped up, looking pale and furious, and tried to salvage the moment by proposing a toast of his own, but the damage was done. The spell was irrevocably broken. The dream had become a waking nightmare. The immediate aftermath was a disorienting, surreal blur. The DJ, bless his professional heart, must have some kind of wedding ruined by catastrophic toast emergency protocol, because he immediately blasted a loud, relentlessly upbeat song. The transition from tomb-like silence to the forced, thumping party music was jarring and grotesque. A few brave or bewildered people started to dance awkwardly, their movements stiff and self-conscious, but the soul of the party was dead on the floor. The celebration had flatlined. For the next hour, I was trapped in a special kind of hell made of polite concern. Guest after guest, a long, somber procession of them, came up to our head table, their faces etched with a deep, uncomfortable pity. They weren't saying, "Congratulations," anymore. The joy was gone. Now, they were whispering, "Are you okay?" And that was unbelievable. "Please don't listen to a word she said." Every sympathetic look, every well-meaning pat on the arm, was another nail in my coffin of public humiliation. It confirmed that the disaster was as big as it felt, that everyone had heard it, that everyone now knew. I could feel hundreds of eyes on me, watching my every move, waiting for me to crack, to cry, to run from the room. I just kept smiling a tight, brittle smile until my cheeks ached, repeating the same meaningless mantra, "I'm fine, thank you so much for coming," over and over again. Until the words lost all meaning. I didn't look at Chloe. I couldn't. I was vaguely aware of her at her table across the dance floor, holding court. She was talking and laughing with one of the groomsmen, throwing her head back as if she hadn't just committed an act of breathtaking, soul-crushing cruelty. Her complete and utter normalcy was almost as shocking as the speech itself. It was the chilling nonchalance of a person who feels no remorse, who believes they have done nothing wrong. It was terrifying. Mark was my anchor in that swirling vortex of misery. He never left my side for a second. His hand was a constant, warm, protective pressure on the small of my back. He became my spokesman, my bodyguard. He fielded questions with a calm, steely grace and deflected concerned relatives, creating a small, protective bubble around me. But nothing could truly shield me from the profound, invasive sense of violation. It felt like I was emotionally naked in front of everyone I knew. We got the cake with fake smiles plastered on our faces. The pictures from that moment are haunting. My eyes are hollow, vacant. Mark's jaw is clenched so tightly you can see the muscles bulging. We decided we couldn't take it anymore. We couldn't endure another minute of the pity, the whispers, the ghost of a party that was supposed to be ours. Less than an hour after the speech, we made the decision to leave our own wedding. We rushed through our goodbyes, a series of hasty hugs and mumbled thanks, making a quiet and dignified escape from a celebration that now felt toxic and unbearable. The car ride to the hotel was completely, utterly silent. The city lights blurred past the window, a smear of color in the darkness. As soon as the car door closed, the tears I'd been holding back with every ounce of my willpower finally streamed down my face, hot and silent. What was there to say? The devastation was too enormous for words. Any attempt to articulate the pain would have felt small and inadequate. When we got to the bridal suite, the scene was a cruel, ironic joke. There were scattered rose petals on the bed, a chilled bottle of champagne waiting in a silver bucket, and a note from the hotel staff congratulating us. It was a stage set for a perfect romantic night that would never happen. I walk over to the vast window, my beautiful, heavy wedding dress suddenly feeling like a suit of armor that had completely and utterly failed to protect me. Mark came and stood behind me, wrapping his arms round my waist, his chin resting on my shoulder, and I finally broke. The dam of composure I had so carefully constructed just shattered. I let out this raw, guttural sob that felt like it was torn from the deepest part of my soul, and I just cried. I cried for my perfect day, now forever tarnished. I cried for the public shame, the memory of all those faces staring at me. But mostly, I cried for the death of a friendship. The person I had loved and trusted for half my life was gone, and she was the one who had killed her. The next morning, I woke up with a pounding headache and a heart that felt like a stone in my chest. My phone was buzzing on the nightstand. It had been buzzing all night. Her name was on the screen. A dozen missed calls and a single, unread text message. With shaking hands, I opened it. It read, "Hey, are you mad?" It was just a joke. Just a joke. The casual cruelty of it, the blatant, shameless attempt to gaslight me into thinking I was the crazy one for being upset, sent a fresh wave of white-hot rage through the grief. That was the moment I knew there was nothing left to salvage. There would be no big confrontation, no screaming match over the phone. I didn't have the energy for a fight. I only had the energy for an ending. I simply typed back a short, cold response. "We have nothing to talk about." And then, with a final, decisive tap of my finger, I blocked her number. I blocked her on my phone, on social media, on every possible avenue of communication. It felt like severing a limb without anesthesia. It was brutal, and it was final. But it was the only way to stop the poison from spreading any further. The shock was finally wearing off, replaced by a deep, hollow, and profound grief. My wedding day was over. My 15-year friendship was over. And I had absolutely no idea how I was supposed to begin to pick up the pieces. The first few weeks after the wedding were a dense, disorienting fog. I moved through my days in a daze, functioning on some kind of primal autopilot. Going to work, making dinner, paying bills, it all felt like I was watching someone else live my life from a great distance. Every time a well-meaning colleague mentioned the wedding, or I unpacked another wedding gift, the crushing weight of the humiliation would come rushing back, fresh and sharp. The joy that should have defined the beginning of my marriage, that newlywed bliss you hear so much about, was completely tainted by this deep, pervasive sadness. Grieving the end of a 15-year friendship was, in many ways, more painful and more complicated than any romantic breakup I'd ever had. It was a special, bizarre kind of mourning for someone who was still alive, walking around in the world. It was a ghost haunting my present. Just allowing myself to feel the full weight of that pain, without trying to rush past it or numb it, was the first agonizing, but necessary, step. My fortress during this time was Mark. He was nothing short of extraordinary. He became my shield, my spokesperson, my emotional guardian. He fielded calls from nosy, gossip-hungry relatives. inventing plausible excuses for my silence. He tactfully and expertly changed the subject when friends asked him many pointed questions about Chloe and what had happened. He never once told me to get over it or move on. He just sat with me in the sadness. He let me cry for hours. He let me be angry, letting me rant and rage about the injustice of it all. He just held me when I woke up from nightmares about the speech, my heart pounding in my chest. His unwavering support, his quiet, constant presence, was the only foundation I had when my own world felt like it had crumbled into dust. After about a month of trying to power through it on my own, of telling myself I should be stronger, I realized I couldn't do it. The betrayal had planted a seed of self-doubt that was growing like a toxic weed in my mind. I kept replaying not just the wedding, but my entire friendship with Chloe, combing through 15 years of memories, questioning my own judgment at every turn. How could I have been so profoundly wrong about someone I thought I knew better than myself? The betrayal had damaged my ability to trust anyone, but most devastatingly, it had damaged my ability to trust myself. That's when I finally made the decision to see a therapist. It felt like a profound failure at first, an admission that I was broken beyond my own ability to repair. But walking into that first session, and telling the story from beginning to end to a kind, impartial stranger, was like finding a lifeline in a storm. It was the first place I could lay out all the ugly, jagged, painful pieces without being judged, without seeing that familiar look of pity in someone's eyes. Therapy became my archaeological dig site. With my therapist's gentle guidance, I started to excavate the ruins of my friendship with Chloe. We went back, year by year, and with the snow painful lens, I started to see a pattern I had been willfully blind to before. It was all there, hiding in plain sight, the subtle put-downs disguised as jokes. The way she'd subtly, almost imperceptibly, compete with me in every area of our lives. The way my successes were always met with feigned, slightly forced praise, while my failures were met with an intense, almost giddy interest. I had the painful, sickening realization that our friendship had been toxic for years. The power dynamic was all wrong. I had enabled it by unconsciously making myself smaller to soothe her deep-seated insecurities, by downplaying my achievements so she wouldn't feel threatened, by absorbing her casual cruelties as just the way she is. The process of unearthing this truth was excruciating, but it was also profoundly empowering. It was the beginning of a seismic shift in my perspective. I finally understood, on a deep, cellular level, that her speech wasn't about me at all. It was about her. Her envy, her insecurities, her desperate, pathological need to be the center of attention. It all came pouring out in a torrent of poison on the one day that was supposed to be mine. She needed to tear me down to feel big. She needed to expose my shame to cover up her own. That realization was the turning point. It was the beginning of the slow, painstaking process of separating her actions from my self-worth. My therapist had me write a letter to Chloe that I would never send. I filled pages and pages of a notebook with all my rage and hurt and confusion. I screamed at her on paper. I cried. I asked her why, over and over again. I poured every last drop of the poison out of my system and onto the page. And by pouring it all out, I started to empty it of its power over me. The final phase of my healing was about letting go. This didn't mean forgiving Chloe in the way you see in movies, where there's a dramatic confrontation followed by a tearful hug and everything's fine. I knew that would never happen, and I no longer wanted it to. Forgiveness, for me, was a quiet, internal act. It was about forgiving myself for not seeing the red flags, for trusting so blindly. It was about releasing the bitterness that was only poisoning me, not her. I had to make a conscious, daily choice to stop letting her live rent-free in my head. I had to let go of the hope for an apology I knew would never come. True healing, I learned, wasn't about her getting what she deserved. It was about me reclaiming my own peace, my own narrative. I started to focus on the future. I focused on my incredible marriage. Mark and I had survived a trial by fire in our very first days, as husband and wife, and it forged a bond between us that was stronger than steel. I started investing my time and energy in my real friendships, The ones that were built on a foundation of mutual support, not quiet competition. The end of that toxic friendship, as painful and traumatic as it was, opened up space in my life. It was like clearing out a diseased tree from a garden, and in its place, healthier, more authentic connections had the sunlight and room they needed to grow. This was my story, but I know with a sad certainty that I'm not the only one who has lived through something like this. The pain of being betrayed by a close friend, a sister, a maid of honor, is sadly universal. It's a specific, deep kind of hurt that can make you question everything you thought you knew about love, loyalty, and yourself. If you've been through something similar, if you've had to heal from a friend's betrayal that turned your world upside down, I want to hear about it. Share your experience in the comments. Let's create a space where we can support each other, where we can validate each other's pain and share our stories of survival and resilience. Because no one should have to walk through this kind of fire alone. It's been 5 years since my wedding day. For a long, long time, I couldn't look at my wedding photos without feeling a tidal wave of shame and sadness wash over me. The joy captured in those images felt like a lie. But now, when I look at them, I see something entirely different. I see a woman standing on the precipice of a profound, though excruciatingly painful, transformation. I see a husband whose love was tested in the most public and brutal way imaginable, and was proven to be unbreakable. I see the beginning of a life that is infinitely more authentic, more grounded, and more genuinely joyful because of the lessons I was forced to learn in the wreckage of that day. The scars are still there. I don't think scars like that ever completely disappear. But they don't hurt anymore. They're no longer a source of shame, but a quiet, powerful reminder of my own resilience. They remind me of the immense strength it took to walk through that fire and come out the other side, scorched but whole. My circle of friends is smaller now, but it's solid. It's built on a foundation of mutual respect, genuine love, and unwavering support, things I now know are utterly non-negotiable in any relationship. If you are in the middle of this kind of pain right now, if you are reeling from a betrayal that has shattered your world and your sense of self, please hear me when I say this. This is not the end of your story. The grief is real, the anger is valid, and the pain is immense. But it is not permanent. Healing isn't a straight line. It's a messy, winding path with setbacks and unexpected turns. But it is always, always possible. The end of a toxic relationship isn't just a loss. It is a liberation. It is a powerful, painful, and ultimately beautiful chance to clear out what isn't meant for you and to make space for the genuine connections, the real love, and the true, uncompromised happiness you deserve. You get to write the next chapter. And believe me, it can be more beautiful than you can possibly imagine. My maid of honor, my best friend of 15 years, stood up to give her speech. The champagne flute in her hand glittered under the chandeliers of the grand ballroom, catching the light and splintering it into 1,000 tiny, dancing diamonds. She had this perfect, practiced smile on her face, the one she'd mastered for photos, the one that made her look both endearing and completely in control. I remember the thought crossing my mind with such pure, unadulterated clarity. How beautiful she looked. How impossibly lucky I was to have her by my side. She was supposed to be my person, the keeper of my secrets, the co-author of my history. We were a duo, a constant, the one fixed point in the ever-spinning chaos of life. But instead of the well wishes and tearful, happy anecdotes I was expecting, she raised her glass, and with that same serene, camera-ready smile, she didn't toast my future. She detonated my past. In front of 200 guests, our families, our friends, my new husband, my entire world assembled in one room, she shared a secret that was never hers to tell. It was a secret I had entrusted to her in the darkest hour of my life, a confession whispered in tears and shame. She took that fragile, wounded piece of my soul, and she held it up for public inspection. This is the story of how my best friend ruined my wedding, and how I painstakingly, piece by agonizing piece, put my life back together after the ultimate betrayal. It wasn't just a bad speech. It wasn't a drunken mistake, a clumsy attempt at humor that missed the mark. This was different. This was a precision strike, a character assassination delivered with the chilling composure of a surgeon. The silence that fell over that ballroom wasn't just quiet, it was a physical entity, heavier and more suffocating than anything I've ever felt. It pressed down on my chest, stealing the air from my lungs. In that moment, the humiliation was so absolute, so profound, it felt like a physical drowning. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't feel anything but the searing heat of 200 pairs of eyes on my face. The person I trusted most in the world, the one who held the keys to the most vulnerable chambers of my heart, had just held a magnifying glass to my deepest, most private wound and set it on fire for everyone to see. The shock was so profound it felt like an out-of-body experience. I could see myself sitting there, in my beautiful white dress, a frozen smile plastered on my face, while the real me hovered somewhere near the ceiling, watching the scene unfold with a detached, clinical horror. This isn't just another wedding disaster story you might hear and laugh about later. This is a story about the devastating, complicated grief that comes when a friendship dies a violent death. It's about the long, painful, but ultimately empowering journey of finding your way back to yourself when the person who helped build you is the one who tries to tear you down. To understand the depth of the wound, you have to understand the bond she severed. Her name was Chloe. I met her when we were 13 years old, two gangly creatures of profound awkwardness, navigating the treacherous waters of middle school. We were all sharp knees, clunky braces, and a shared, palpable insecurity that radiated from us like heat. We bonded instantly during a miserable PE class, hiding behind the bleachers to avoid a particularly sadistic game of dodgeball. We discovered a shared love for outrageously bad fantasy novels and an even more passionate, mutual hatred for mandatory physical education. That tiny act of rebellion, hiding from flying rubber balls, was the cornerstone of our friendship. She became my person. She was the first person I told, in a hushed, terrified whisper over a crackling phone line late at night, that I thought my parents were going to get a divorce. I didn't have to explain the fear. She just understood it, absorbing my panic and holding it with me. A few years later, I was the one who held her hand in the sterile, silent waiting room of the hospital when her grandmother passed away. I sat with her for hours, not saying much, just being a physical presence against the overwhelming tide of her grief. Our lives weren't just parallel, they were completely, inextricably intertwined. Our friendship wasn't just a part of my life. For 15 years, it felt like a fundamental part of my identity. I didn't know where I ended and she began. We navigated everything together, a two-person team against the world. High school was a blur of shared lockers, past notes, and frantic, last-minute study sessions. First heartbreaks were dissected over giant tubs of ice cream, every text message and awkward interaction analyzed with the rigor of Talmudic scholars. We endured terrible part-time jobs at the mall, folding sweaters, and serving yogurt with a shared, cynical eye roll that made it bearable. We filled out our college applications side by side at her kitchen table, dreaming of futures that we assumed, without question, would continue to run alongside each other. She was the one I'd call, sobbing and hysterical, when I bombed my calculus final, and without me even having to ask. She'd show up at my door an hour later with a pint of my favorite ice cream and a terrible, cheesy movie she knew I loved. We had our own language, a complex shorthand built over a decade and a half of shared looks, inside jokes, and whispered secrets. It was a language no one else could speak or understand. She knew my fears, my dreams, my deepest, most closely guarded insecurities. And I knew hers. I trusted her with a blind, absolute faith that, looking back now, was dangerously, catastrophically naive. When my husband, Mark, proposed, my hands were still shaking and the tears were still wet on my cheeks when I dialed her number. I called her even before I called my mom. That's how fundamental she was. I was screaming with a joy so explosive I felt like I would burst. And through the phone, she was screaming right along with me, her voice a perfect mirror of my own elation. "We're getting married," she shrieked, and that we felt so deeply, perfectly natural. Of course, it was we. It had always been we. Our victories were shared, our struggles were shared, our lives were shared. Asking her to be my maid of honor wasn't even a question. It was a foregone conclusion, an assumption we had both held since we were teenagers planning our imaginary weddings in the margins of our notebooks. Still, I wanted to make it special. I did the whole formal ask a custom-made box with a tiny bottle of her favorite champagne, some expensive chocolates, and a long, heartfelt letter that I'd spent days writing, telling her I couldn't imagine taking this next step in my life without her standing right beside me. She cried when she opened it. I cried. We hugged for a long time. It was a perfect, cinematic moment, one of those moments you think you'll treasure forever. Now, it plays back in my head like a scene from a horror film, the prelude to the disaster, where the victim smiles, completely unaware of the killer standing right behind her. The wedding planning started in a glorious, optimistic whirlwind of excitement. It felt like the ultimate project for our friendship, the grand culmination of everything we were. We spent entire weekends poring over bridal magazines, creating elaborate Pinterest boards, and visiting potential venues. We tasted so many wedding cakes that we both felt sick, laughing as we debated the merits of buttercream versus fondant. But now, with the painful, crystal-clear 20/20ths of hindsight, I can see the red flags were there all along. They weren't big, dramatic banners of warning. They were small, subtle, like little paper cuts you don't notice until you're bleeding. When I found my dream dress, a beautiful aligned gown with delicate, hand-stitched lace sleeves, I came out of the dressing room beaming, feeling more beautiful than I ever had in my life. The other bridesmaids and my mother gasped. Chloe just tilted her head, a thoughtful, almost critical look on her face. "Oh, it's lovely," she said, her tone just a little too flat. "Are you sure you want something so traditional?" The word hung in the air, turning my dream dress into something boring, something uninspired. Another time, when I was showing her the floral proposal, ecstatic about the peonies and ranunculus we'd chosen, she glanced at the price sheet and let out a low whistle. "Wow," she said, with a little laugh that didn't quite reach her eyes. Someone sparing no expense. It felt less like a joke and more like a judgment, a subtle insinuation that I was being frivolous or spoiled. Then there were the little digs at Mark. They were always couched in humor, always delivered with a sarcastic wink, which made them impossible to confront without seeming like I couldn't take a joke. She'd make comments about how I was settling down, with a slight emphasis that made it sound like settling for. She'd call Mark my ball and chain in a way that felt more pointed than playful. Once, when we were discussing honeymoon destinations, I mentioned we wanted somewhere quiet and relaxing. Chloe rolled her eyes dramatically. "Of course you do. God forbid you guys do anything adventurous. Mark has you fully domesticated already." I brushed it all off. I told myself that was just her brand of cynical humor, the personality trait I had once found so endearing. I told myself she was just stressed from all the maid of honor duties I had piled on her. I made excuses for her, one after another, building a fortress of denial around myself. The alternative that my best friend, my other half, was actively, consciously trying to undermine my happiness was simply unthinkable. It was a possibility too monstrous to even consider. I saw what I wanted to see, my best friend, my rock, standing right by my side. Just like always. The truth is, the foundation of our friendship had been cracking for a long time, riddled with fissures of jealousy and resentment I refused to acknowledge. The wedding didn't cause the cracks. It just blew the whole damn thing wide open. I was so blinded by the weight and warmth of 15 years of history that I couldn't see the person who was standing right in front of me. I thought she was my rock, but she was really the one holding the hammer, just waiting for the perfect moment to swing. The wedding day started like a fairy tale. The morning sun streamed into the bridal suite, illuminating the floating dust motes and the joyful chaos within. Mimosas were flowing, the playlist we'd curated for months was playing softly, and the air was thick with the scent of hairspray and happy, nervous jitters. Chloe was a whirlwind of perfect maid of honor energy. She was magnificent. She steamed my veil with a focused intensity. She helped my mom with her finicky corsage. She made sure I actually ate a piece of toast between makeup and hair. She played the part so flawlessly, with such convincing affection, that any of the weird, unsettling feelings I'd had over the past few months just melted away into the warmth of her attention. I chided myself for ever doubting her. When I was finally in my dress, standing in front of the full-length mirror, I saw her come up behind me in the reflection. She put her hand on my shoulders, her eyes meeting mine in the glass. "You look breathtaking, Sarah," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. A single, perfect tear rolled down her cheek. "I am so happy for you." I thought it was a tear of happiness for me, a beautiful expression of our long and cherished friendship. I know now it was something else entirely. It was a tear for her, a moment of performative emotion that was all about her role in my day, not my day itself. Walking down the aisle toward Mark was pure, unadulterated bliss. It was one of those rare, perfect moments in life where the entire world just narrows to a single point. In that moment, it was his face, waiting for me at the end of that long path. The noise, the guests, the flowers, it all faded into a soft, happy blur. During the ceremony, I glanced over at Chloe, who was standing beside me. She was dabbing her eyes with a lace-trimmed tissue, the perfect picture of a devoted, emotional friend. I felt a surge of overwhelming love for her, for sharing this perfect moment with me. The ceremony was beautiful, a perfect blend of solemnity and personal touches. We said our vows, we exchanged rings, and we were married. The joy was a physical force, so overwhelming it felt like it was lifting me off the ground. Our reception was in a historic downtown ballroom with soaring, ornate ceilings and massive crystal chandeliers that cast a warm, golden glow over everything. The energy in the room was electric. Everyone was laughing, our favorite band was playing, and Mark and I felt like we were floating through our own dream. We danced, we mingled, we drank champagne, and for a few hours, everything was perfect. Then, it was time for the toasts. My dad went first, giving a speech that was so sweet and heartfelt it had everyone crying happy tears. Mark's best man, his brother Tom, followed with a hilarious, loving roast that had the whole room roaring with laughter. And then, the DJ's voice boomed through the speakers, and now, a toast from our maid of honor, Chloe. She walked to the microphone, a vision in her emerald green dress, which shimmered under the lights. She moved with a practiced grace, completely at ease. She tapped her glass with a fingernail, and the cheerful din of the room instantly went quiet. She started out perfectly. "For those of you who don't know me, I'm Chloe, and I've had the immense privilege of being Sarah's best friend for 15 years. She smiled at me, a wide, brilliant smile. I've seen her through some truly questionable fashion choices, terrible teenage haircuts, and even worse boyfriends. The guests chuckled, a warm, appreciative sound. I was there the night she met Mark, and I saw from the very beginning how happy he made her. "And Mark," she said, turning to him, "thank you. Thank you for loving my best friend the way she so clearly deserves to be loved." It was so sweet. It was so perfect. It was exactly what I had expected, what I had dreamed of. I squeezed Mark's hand under the table, my heart feeling like it was going to burst with love for my husband, for my friend, for this perfect day. And then, her tone shifted. It was subtle at first, almost imperceptible. A slight change in her cadence, a new, sharp glint in her eye. "Sarah and I," she went on, her voice dropping into a more confidential, almost conspiratorial tone, as if she were letting everyone in on a little secret. "We've always told each other everything. Our deepest, darkest secrets. And that's the beauty of true friendship, isn't it? Knowing someone's every flaw, every mistake, and loving them anyway." She paused, taking a slow, deliberate look round the room. She had them. Every single person was hanging on her every word. "For instance," she said, taking a small sip of her champagne and locking eyes with me across the room, a silent challenge in her gaze, "I'll never forget the summer after our first year of college. Sarah came home completely heartbroken. She had been seeing this older guy, a professor, actually. No one knew. Not her parents, not our friends. It was her big, scandalous secret. A nervous murmur rippled through the guests. It was a quiet sound, but in the focused silence, it felt like a roar. A cold, icy dread started creeping up my spine, prickling at the back of my neck. My smile felt frozen to my face, a brittle, unnatural rictus. This wasn't some funny, embarrassing story we laughed about now. This was a painful, deeply shameful experience I had confessed to her in a moment of utter vulnerability. A memory I had buried so deep I could barely stand to think about it myself. I felt Mark's hand tighten round mine, his knuckles white. I could see the confusion blooming on my parents' faces, my mother's brow furrowed in concern. Chloe pressed on, her voice now dripping with a cloying, fake sympathy that was more insulting than outright malice. She was so convinced she was in love. Head over heels. But he ended it, of course. Very suddenly. And she was an absolute wreck. But what I've always admired about Sarah is her resilience. Or maybe, she added, her voice sharpening, it's her ability to always land on her feet. Because it wasn't long after that whole messy, unfortunate affair that she met our stable, reliable Mark. She paused again, letting the toxic implication hang in the air like poison gas. She had just told a room full of our family, our friends, and my new in-laws that I was damaged goods. That my relationship with my husband, the man I had just pledged my life to, was nothing more than me rebounding, settling for the safe, boring choice after being used and discarded by someone more exciting. She wasn't just telling a secret. She was rewriting my history, reframing my love story as a pathetic consolation prize.